Hello, I'm Brandon House, and welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour. This is our second program in a series on the Counter-Reformation of the Jesuit Order. Chris Pinto and I have both been doing research on the Jesuit Order for some time, and we are coming together to present this information to you. He's bringing his research, I'm bringing mine, and then we're presenting it and discussing it. And this is our second interview in this series on, again, the Counter-Reformation of the Jesuit Order. We'll get to our conversation in just 1 minute. But let me remind you, if you appreciate this program and you want access to literally hundreds of hours, thousands of hours to be precise, of programming just like this, both television and radio, we invite you to join our Situation Room at situationroom.net. It's over 1,400 MP3s of my daily national radio show, the Worldview Weekend radio program. We're filming in May of 2012, and at this time it's over 1,400 programs. We had 5 new programs each and every week that you can hear inside the Situation Room. You also can get the second hour of the Worldview Weekend radio program. A couple times each month we record a second hour of that radio program that's only available to Situation Room members. We also have, as of this date, May of 2012, over 140 presentations that you can watch on demand, over 140 DVDs that you can watch on demand. And we're adding dozens of new programs each and every year. In fact, this program is a perfect example. It rolls right into the Situation Room. If you're not a member of the Situation Room, you can become a member. It's just $59.95 a year to join and have access to literally over $8,000 in resources and growing. SituationRoom.net is the website, SituationRoom.net. And if you also appreciate this broadcast and would like to be a partner with us through the Worldview Weekend Foundation, so we might disseminate this through our national television program and get our radio show out there on more radio networks and continue to carry them on the networks we carry them on, we invite you to partner with us through the Worldview Weekend Foundation. The foundation also helps us with research as well as sponsoring free Biblical Worldview Weekend conferences throughout the nation, and as well as doing special web-based programming, conferences, and television broadcast. The foundation website is worldviewweekendfoundation.com, worldviewweekendfoundation.com. Chris, welcome back to our second program together.
Well, Brandon, it's good to be back as always.
In our first program, I made reference to this paper put out by a doctor, a PhD. His bio on the website says he did his PhD at Stanford. And this Dr. David Plasted, it's titled Estimates of the Number Killed by the Papacy in the Middle Ages and Later. This is a rather lengthy paper. I found this not too long ago, sent it over to you. I've posted it on my website. You've posted it on yours.
Right.
This is a very credible guy. Again, according to his own bio, he did his PhD work at Stanford, and he now teaches at the University of North Carolina. So people who maybe were say, well, where'd you get this figure of 50 million killed during the 605-year or over 600 years, some say 605-year Inquisition. This PhD has done a lot of work right here. This is a very credible report, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the reason for that report, I think, at least one of the reasons, is because through the 20th century and in the late 19th century before that, the Roman Catholic Church began to deny that they had killed millions of people through the slaughters and things like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the Massacre of the Waldenses in the Piedmont in 1655, and the other great massacres that were known that the papal armies were guilty of. And what happened was, after the Revolutionary era, that was no longer fashionable. It wasn't the politically correct thing to be guilty of. So the Catholic historians, and the Jesuits in particular, began to rewrite history. And what's interesting is that prior to the 19th century, they had always boasted about the Inquisition. They were always very proud of it. And now they began to deny it and to diminish the numbers of those who had been killed and so on. And in fact, in England, a group came together called the Protestant Truth Society, and I've got one of their books here, but the Protestant Truth Society was formed specifically to counter or to refute the modern claims that Rome has been making, trying to rewrite history, basically. And the Protestant Truth Society came together to restate the Protestant view of history. Yes, these massacres did happen. Yes, 50 million Christians were killed for believing the Bible and preaching the gospel to others. So it is definitely, if you go to do your own research, you'll find a lot of conflicting evidence, but I think Dr. Plasted's essay there is invaluable.
And so you'll find it online. You just put it into a search engine, David A. Plaisted, Plaisted, estimates of the number killed by the papacy in the Middle Ages and later. Put it into a search engine. It'll pop right up as a PDF. You can read it online or print it out. Tons of documentation to make that case. Before we get into 8 areas that I have found, 8 areas that the Jesuit order focuses on. I want to go through those 8 in the next few programs. And I've sent you my PowerPoint presentation on this in advance. You went through it, and then you brought information supporting these 8.
Right. And
we'll get into that as well as some other information that you've brought over the next few programs. Let's talk real quick though about we hear oftentimes critics of Christianity talk about the Crusades. Well, you Christians, you brought on the Crusades, and look at the horrible things you did in the name of Christ in the Crusades. We even hear Muslims talking about the Christians in the Crusades. Let's make it very clear, who was it that was carrying out the Crusades?
Well, it was the Church of Rome. There's no question about that. And it used to be, prior to the 20th century, there was a clear line of demarcation that was drawn between Bible-based Protestant Christianity and Roman Catholicism. And it was understood by all of the reformers, by Martin Luther, by John Calvin, William Tyndale, John Wycliffe. All of these Christian men understood that it was the papacy that was out persecuting people. And in fact, as we show in my film, A Lamp in the Dark, the Inquisition and that whole era began because of Bible believers, because people were reading the Bible and they were disagreeing with the Pope. And that's what led to the Great Inquisition in the 13th century. But even with the Crusades and so on, which were really about the Pope's desire to claim the Temple Mount, which they did through the Knights Templar. That's why they're called the Templars. And they had
Temple Mount in
Jerusalem. In Jerusalem. And their desire was to ultimately rebuild the temple in Jerusalem so the Pope, it is said, could rule the world from Solomon's rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. And that's really what the Crusades are said to be about. And of course, you can read a bunch of histories about that.
All right, let's differentiate between the Crusades, which started around 1100, and the Inquisition. When did the Inquisition start?
The Inquisition begins, that period begins about 1209 AD. And that begins with what was called the Albigensian Crusade. And the Albigensians, according to the Reformers and the Reform view of history, the Albigensians were Bible believers, and they preferred the Bible rather than the authority of the Pope. Mm-hmm. And so they had a series of debates with a Catholic priest named Dominic Gutzman. And Dominic could not persuade them to convert to Catholicism, so he got angry, and he said he was going to go raise up an army, come back, and then persecute them, which he did. And he goes back to Rome, he meets with Pope Innocent III, Simon de Montfort raises up an army, and then they come back and they launch what's called the Albigensian Crusade. But that was really the beginning of the Great Inquisition. And then the Pope begins to outlaw the Bible and forbid people from reading it. He says the Bible inspires heresy, largely because of what happened with the Albigensians.
So we have to differentiate between the Crusades that started around 1100 that were largely against the Muslims,
right,
and then the Crusades or Inquisition that against the Protestants that started in 1209.
Right. Really
the Church of Rome has been waging war against a lot of people. So when our listeners hear people say, "Oh, you Christians and your Crusades," mm-hmm. we have to be sure to differentiate between Bible-believing Protestant Christians who were not involved in the Crusades, which that was instigated and carried out by the Church of Rome. But Christians get lumped in there with that.
Exactly.
That's the point to be made.
Exactly.
So don't let people say, "Oh, you Christians, you were involved in the Crusades," because it wasn't Protestant Bible-believing Christians that were doing that. It was the Church of Rome.
And what I think is important about that, Brandon, is that the men and the women who founded our country, the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they came here with that very clear understanding, which is why they forbade the involvement of Roman Catholics in the early colonial government of America. I mean, Catholics could not be involved in the government. They could not vote. They couldn't hold office and things like that. And it was because of the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformation and all of their attempts to overthrow the authority of Protestant countries. And so that's the reason why they had laws limiting the activities of Catholics in the early colonies. But all of that changed as a result of the American Revolution.
And of course, that could be some of the concern that you and I would have with the revolutionaries who, with their what sounds so noble, the freedom of religion, then all of a sudden you got Freemasons and people that were holding to views counter to biblical Christianity are allowed now to run for office and be in public office, whereas in the colonies, that was not allowed.
Right, it was not allowed, and you know that's the real issue, because I think Protestant governments, Christian governments generally, would tolerate alternative views from other people, but they would not give them equal authority in government. They wouldn't allow them to hold office. It's kind of like if you went to Rome today, the Pope is Catholic. He's the chief executive over Vatican City proper. He has a Catholic government. You and I could go visit there as Protestants, and Buddhists and Muslims and other people could go visit, and we could go on vacation or whatever, but they're not going to let us run the country for them. It was the same principle in early America.
You would have civil rights, you have liberty and freedom, they don't want you involved in their government.
Right, and making laws.
Yes.
And that's the whole problem that we're facing right now, 200 years after the revolution. Right now, it's why we have abortion and gay marriage issues and all this other kind of stuff, because there's not a clear understanding of exactly what belief system is in charge of the United States.
And so that's why you and I believe we have a Christian heritage that starts with the colonies, but why we're very suspect of some of the revolutionaries who brought in their ecumenicalism, which then just opened the floodgates to what we have today, which is, again, going back to the colonies, said, no, we're not going to allow the Jesuits and the priests to come in here because we know about the Crusades and we know what they've been up to and how they like to get involved and overturn government. So we have the Crusades starting around 1100, dealing the Church of Rome going against the Muslims, and then we have around 1209 the beginning of the Crusades against the Protestants. That's where we left off.
Right, right. Although I should say at that point in history, they weren't really called Protestants. They're generally viewed as Bible believers. And they were acknowledged by everybody, even somebody like Voltaire. I found an interesting quote from Voltaire, who was not especially a friend of Christianity, but even he acknowledged that the reason that the Albigensians were persecuted was because they wanted to live their life according to the Bible only, and that's what they were known for. And of course the Reformers picked that up, and that became the Reformation cry, sola scriptura, only the scriptures. And they had learned it from these earlier groups, the Albigenses and the Waldenses as well. And
so 1540 is when Ignatius Loyola forms officially the Jesuit order. So from 1209 to 1540, the Inquisitions had been well underway, almost halfway through.
Right. They had, and the Dominicans were the ones who ran the order. In fact, if you go, they ran the Inquisition. If you see old paintings of the Inquisition, you'll see the black-robed priests, and they would have a white undergarment, and that's how you know. That's what the Dominicans wore, and that's what they're known for historically. But then what happened is when the Jesuits came along, they took over the Inquisition, and they basically, recreated it and got it underway again. And it said that within the first 100 years, more than 900,000 Bible-believing Christians ultimately died as a result.
And again, if you're doubting our numbers, just go online and get a copy of the book, Estimates of the Number Killed by the Papacy in the Middle Ages and later by David A. Plasted. And again, his bio on the website reads that he did his PhD work at Stanford. Very highly footnoted documentation. All right, now, with that as our foundation, looking again at the Jesuit order, let's talk about 8 areas that I've come up with in my research of where I think the Jesuits like to focus. And then you've brought some research to help actually confirm some of my findings as well.
Right.
So the first one is ecumenicalism. For those who maybe don't know, what is ecumenicalism?
Well, there's 2 types of ecumenicalism, and when you talk to people in the evangelical community, there's ecumenicalism between Christians, different Christian groups and denominations, and some people think that ecumenism is just about dialogue between Catholics and Lutherans and Methodists and Baptists and this kind of thing, that's ecumenism.
Hello, I'm Brandon House, and thank you for watching the Worldview Weekend Hour. In about 1982-83, my friend, the late Dr. Ron Carlson, had his ordination service. And the man that delivered the ordination message that day was a man by the name of Walter Martin. I have an audio of the sermon he preached that day, back in about 1982-83. You know what's striking? In that presentation, he said that Christian media would increasingly become known for censoring biblical truth. In fact, he talked about the fact that he could go on a lot of secular radio and television outlets and say things that Christian media outlets would not let him say. Well, that was 1982-83, and guess what? we can tell you from firsthand experience of Christian media outlets that don't like what we have to say. And it's simply biblical truth. Recently, a well-known magazine that claims to be a biblical worldview magazine would not take our advertising. They didn't like the fact that we were calling out the false Jesus and false gospel of Mormonism, of the Word of Faith, of the Church of Rome, of the New Apostolic Reformation. And we find that many radio stations don't want to carry our radio show because we speak biblical truth. I believe that much of Christian media today is doing exactly what Dr. Walter Martin said was occurring and would only increase. They're censoring biblical truth because, you see, I believe there's a form of political correctness that's followed even within Christian media. It's not politically correct to speak out against Mormonism. It's not politically correct to speak out and say, hey, the Jesus of the Church of Rome is not the Jesus of the Bible. When they're offering Jesus to be sacrificed in the wafer or in the juice through transubstantiation every week, as the Church of Rome does, the Catholic Church, that's not the Jesus of the Bible. You redefine Jesus, you redefine the gospel. But it's not politically correct today to say these things. In fact, I was listening to a sermon not too long ago by Dr. John MacArthur. And in that sermon, he said that they have to be very careful what they put into their daily Bible teaching program, Grace to You, because if they put certain things in, stations won't carry the program or will drop the program altogether. Well, that's why we have found the need to increasingly create our own broadcast outlet, where we can speak biblical truth without what I believe is now becoming censorship within the Christian media. If you appreciate Worldview Weekend Radio and Worldview TV, I would invite you to partner with us through the Worldview Weekend Foundation. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible contribution, you can do so now by visiting the website worldviewweekendfoundation.com. You can become a monthly contributor automatically, or you can make a one-time contribution or contributions as you see fit at worldviewweekendfoundation.com. Again, we've started Worldview Weekend Television, wvwtv.com, so that we can get out biblical truth without fear of censorship or without fear of, well, if we say this, this outlet won't carry it or this outlet will cancel the program. So now we're pretty independent to speak biblical truth without apology and without compromise. If you appreciate that fact, then would you please partner with us right now? By the way, it costs quite a bit of money to put the program together, as well as the fact that when people watch the show, they're using bandwidth. All of this bandwidth costs money, and we need help in underwriting not only the production of the broadcast, but also the bandwidth. Thank you so much for partnering with us through the Worldview Weekend Foundation.